All right, so we are still doing our preparation for agricultural science CSEC 2024 exam. So we're doing our preparation. So we have some questions running through. Hopefully students will have benefit from these answers, and it will successfully prepare you for your exam. So let's dive right into it. As an agricultural science student, you visited a greenhouse and observed the individual carrying out the two activities below on a crop of tomatoes. So figure A and figure B. We see those two activities. What are the individuals carrying out? Identify the practice displayed in figure A and B and state the benefit of each practice to the successful growth of tomatoes. Now, in figure A, we see the person utilizing a secateur, and what they're doing, they're basically removing a part of the tomato plant, a branch. Now, this concept is known as pruning. Now, pruning, let me just go down. So we're supposed to establish what is A. So A would have been pruning. And so by doing pruning, what we do is to allow the plant to focus the energy, not on this unwanted branch, but to focus the energy on producing high quality fruits. So some of these branch, they will basically utilize the energy from the plant. And that's not what you want when your tomatoes are basically the tomato plants are reach maturity and they're ready to flower. You want them to focus that energy on the production of fruits. So we basically go through and we prune and remove the excess branches, those unwanted branches that the energy from the plant would have been utilized. Now in B, figure B, we basically see the concept of a cord that is around the tomato stem, and there's a stick in the midst of the plant, and what the individual is doing right now is staking. Now if you notice, you would have seen you're seeing a small fruit right here, and so once the tomato plant starts to produce fruits, because of the nature of the stem, it would require some form of support, because this will cause the fruits to be hanging down on the ground, and sometimes the branches can even break due to the amount of fruits. So this benefit of staking, it provides support to the plant, and so the plant will have produced the fruits, and they would have been allowing the stem or the branch to remain upright. So again, just to run through the two diagrams. A, pruning, the benefit, you basically remove the unwanted branches. We allow the plant to focus that energy in providing high quality fruits. B, we basically use a stick and we tie the cord around the stem of the plant, and that would allow support. And so it allows the fruit, when the plant starts to produce fruit, and also it allows the plant to grow upright, in an upright position, and that will allow for the proper distribution of the leaves so that they can photosynthesize, and in the end allow for a great yield. Now part 2 says, describe any other cultural practice that can be carried out on a crop of tomato. And on a crop of tomato, we can practice mulching. Mulching is the concept of placing organic or inorganic material over the surface of the soil. Now we basically do the mulching, and if you're a farmer, if the person is encountering some form of drought, Mulching is the correct thing. It has several benefits. If it is a organic mulch, it will break down and add nutrients for the tomato plants. If it is a situation where you're looking at the mulch, what the main thing for mulching is to conserve on the water within the soil, and so it reduces evaporation. Mulching also serves as a means of suppressing weed growth. So when you place those organic mulch or inorganic mulch around the surface of the soil, it basically blocks the sunlight from the seeds that are in the soil, and so they're not able to basically, after germination, not able to continue their lifespan because they're being suppressed. Mulching also keeps the soil much cooler for the tomato plants. And even if you have the fruits hanging down after they have actually been, started to grow and increase in size, the mulch will help as a bedding to cushion the fruit and not allow it to be touching the ground. And that can also cause it to have some form of bruise or damage even before you harvest. So mulching can be done. Another cultural practice is molding, loosening the soil around the root zone, and this encourages deeper root penetration. It encourages the better availability of the plants to, once you have deeper root penetration, now the plant can uptake water and nutrients properly. It increases the air which having oxygen, and so the roots of the plant can now undergo root respiration, which will help it to carry out the necessary task by obtaining energy. So molding is another cultural practice. We can also do fertilizing, the adding of an organic substance or inorganic substance to the soil to increase the nutrient content. So those are three cultural practices that one can carry out on a tomato crop. Now, we just mentioned about fertilizer. Question 2 says, or this question says, a farmer wants to improve his yield. And when we talk about the yield, we're talking about the amount of corn, and was told he should add fertilizers to do so. So you can add fertilizer to the soil. So define the term fertilizer. So this is any inorganic or organic substance. When you basically add it to the soil, it will release one or more nutrients. Now, organic in the sense you have compost, you have manure. Those are examples: bone meal, fish meal, blood meal. These are some examples of organic fertilizer. We say organic in the sense that it's coming from something that was once living, or a byproduct of a living thing. Inorganic, man-made, they're synthesized by man. The urea, the sulfate of ammonia, complete fertilizers, incomplete, and also straight fertilizers, inorganic, and they would add to the soil to release one or more nutrients. Now, on a bag of fertilizer, we see the label 8:16:24. This is actually a ratio. And when you see these values or these numbers, they represent the primary nutrients. The primary nutrients are the nutrients that the plants need in large quantities. In some books or in some literature, they will refer to them as being the farmer's golden tripod. There are three of them. So the first value represents nitrogen. The second value represents phosphorus. And the third value represents potassium, NPK. So what type of fertilizer is this? Now, you describe fertilizers inorganic in terms of the amount of primary nutrients that they supply. And once you're seeing a portion of this fertilizer being having some amount of nitrogen, some amount of phosphorus, some amount of potassium, it simply means we consider this fertilizer to be a complete fertilizer. In some instances, CXC may mark you correct if you say a NPK fertilizer. But I want to use the term complete. Complete in the sense that it has some amount of each primary nutrient. So it has 8% nitrogen, 16% phosphorus, and 24% potassium. For this question, it speaks about the nitrogen to phosphorus ratio in this fertilizer. So the nitrogen phosphorus ratio, once you're going to be providing them with a ratio, you would want to ensure that you do it in the lowest term. So what is the nitrogen? 8. What is the phosphorus? 16. And so the lowest term would have been a 1 to 2, right? So 1 to 2, because 8 can go into 8 one time. Find the lowest common factor, multiple, and you basically write this ratio in its lowest term. So it's a 1 to 2 ratio in terms of nitrogen to phosphorus. The question could have asked you in terms of the nitrogen to potassium. It would have been a 1 to 3, right? So it depends on the question. Question 3 speaks to, on a field trip to an agricultural research station, your class visited a few different units where professionals were at work. Name 2 professionals in the crop unit. Take some time. We know that agriculture has several different career paths. So in terms of crop production, you could have a soil scientist present, and they deal with the soil, the physical and the chemical properties of the soil. We have agronomists. You could have an horticulturist. These are just some examples of the professionals that you'll see at the crop unit. It also says name 2 professionals in the livestock unit. You can see an animal nutritionist. Those persons will basically be the ones that are designing the feed. Veterinarian, the ones that basically look at treat diseases in plants. So those are some career, some professionals that you may see on the livestock. Question 4 is aimed at the acronym HACCP, HACCP. What does it mean? It means Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. And it's a management system that ensures that food is basically prepared in a safe way. Put it simply, safe way. So we are basically creating produce that are going to be consumed, or basically items that are going to be consumed, and they're done in such a way that all of the necessary precautions to prevent any form of contamination of the food, to ensure that it is safe for human consumption and also animals. It says state 1 benefit of HACCP to agriculture. Now what it does, it ensures consumers' confidence. So a lot of times, once you have persons who are operating a factory or an organization that deals with food, and they have adopted the whole concept of the HACCP in their management system, then it gives consumers a confidence that this particular product will be at a certain standard. So it gives the consumers confidence. Now, part B, farmer Ruddy has a crop of tomatoes for export. he's advised to adhere to HACCP principles before his tomatoes will be accepted for export. Now, advise farmer Roddy on two principles of HACCP which he should adopt. Now, HACCP basically has 7 principles. So if you are in the exam, anyone that you feel more comfortable explaining, it would be good to just stick to that one. You have 7 to choose from. So identifying hazard. Identifying hazard is one of the principles. So you're going to be looking at the process of moving or packaging this while you package this tomato. Where is it possible for you to have some form of contamination or hazard, whether it be chemical, biological, or physical, that will basically cause harm, that is hazardous to creating a product that is not going to be fit. So you identify the hazard, chemical, biological, or even physical. The next principle that you may want to visit is, after you identify, you have a critical, what we call a critical control point. Now, after you've identified your hazard, what is it that you can do? Where in the process of producing your product can you establish a point that will create or allow for prevention of these hazards to occur? What things can you put in place to basically eliminate any form of contamination, whether by physical, chemical, or biological means, right? So critical control points. Once you establish the critical control points, you want to have a monitoring procedure. And what this does is to ensure that limits that you set in place. So if it is that you want to ensure that you prevent any form of contamination, while you have a limit, you have to ensure that these critical control points, procedures are done to keep these limits at a given standard. So while you are creating your product, you have these procedures that you need to ensure that you put in place to ensure that the limits are kept while you're creating your product. So the next aspect is the verification procedures. You want to ensure that you check if the system, the HACCP, is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. So you verify that the limits are intact. So if you're supposed to have the tomatoes being washed with a particular water of a certain standard to ensure that it removes the bacteria or any microorganism, then you have to verify that this is being done, because this will ensure that quality is obtained at the end. And so if these are not followed, then farmer Roddy may not meet the export standard. Another principle is to have corrective actions. So what happens if the limits are not maintained? What happens if the water that you're using to wash the tomatoes was not of a certain standard? It did not have, it's not of a certain quality. What is it that you're going to be doing to ensure, right? So corrective measures need to be in place. You also need to have a record. Sometimes you see on the market where you have a produce and it may be recognized by a particular standard. You know, in Jamaica, we have the Bureau of Standard to ensure that consumer safety. If it is that they recognize that a particular produce may be causing some form of harm, then because of proper recording done through HACCP, persons can say, okay, the Buster or the Pepsi or the bigger, the banana chips that was created at this point or have this particular batch number is unfit. We're asking the public to return or to discard of these from their shelves. So they would be able to do that since there's a proper record being kept. Right? So those are the principles, just a rundown. You should be able to, relate to the principle, and then you could understand how it is fitting for a particular business operation, whether a milking, whether in this case the tomatoes, it could be for eggs, anything. The next question says, briefly outline the difference between GAP and GMP. Be sure to state the meaning of each abbreviation. So GAP is basically the abbreviation for good agricultural practices. Now, good agricultural practices, you basically speak about that when you're dealing with producing crops, vegetables, grains, those sort of things, milk on a farm. And so these practices are aimed at ensuring that while you carry out these agricultural activities, it is done in such a way that your produce is still safe. So while you're doing irrigation, for example, to a crop of vegetables, the water that you're using is still up to standard. While you're storing the tomatoes, while you're storing the fruits that you harvest, it's not contaminated. While you carry out the different agricultural practices, it is done in such a way that it still minimizes contamination of these food. So, like, for example, spraying your crop with pesticide. You have that withdrawal period before you can go and harvest that crop. So you need to bear these in mind. You don't want to reap 2 days after you spray your crop with a pesticide, and basically it gets into the home of the consumer where it may cause harm. So good agricultural practices are practices that are done to ensure that while you create or while you're basically growing these agricultural items, vegetables, fruits, grains, meat, milk, they're done in such a way that it's safe. Good manufacturing, GMP is for good manufacturing practices. And now we're talking about the process that is done to obtain different commodities from even these very same raw materials or the primary produce. So if you're making ketchup in a company, what is it that you need to do? Something similar to the HACCP, where you ensure that persons who are working, you have the necessary hygiene. The workers you have biosecurity along that line to help to prevent the contamination of your produce. So while you're dealing with GAP, you're dealing with it on the farm. While you're dealing with good manufacturing practices, you're looking at it in terms of the factory and how they're creating the different product, food items, and it is done in such a way that it minimizes contamination. This next question shows a figure C, and we see some cattle eating or herbage. So they're consuming some grass. And it says which grazing system is shown in figure C above. Now the type of grazing system would have been zero grazing. And as the word zero suggests, so no grazing is done. Instead, the forage is cut and brought to the animals, right? briefly explain how this method of grazing works, and I just spoke about that. You basically have a situation where you go out, the farmer will go out and obtain the forage, and sometimes even in the area of in countries in Jamaica, sometimes you see persons park their cars on the roadway and trying to obtain this forage. Their vehicle, they cut it and they put it. You may even see a man on a bicycle. That is zero grazing, and sometimes you might not have access to the forage at that time. You may be experiencing a situation of predial larceny where once your animals goes out, you have a situation where they are stolen, and so it's best to have them inside, and you can cut the grass and carry to them. You may have shortage in terms of your area where you have the animals. The pastures may be experiencing a drought condition, and so the forage is not so readily available. So you might have to go into a different location to obtain the forage for them. You might have a situation of a hurricane or some other natural disaster that recently occurred, and so you have to keep your animals indoors, and so you have to basically go out and get the forage for them. Continuous grazing and rotational grazing are two other methods. Outline the difference between the two grazing systems. Now, as the word suggests, continuous. So the animals are allowed to go and graze in the pasture continuously. So there's no real restriction to the animals. And so you basically allow them to just roam and gather their forage when it is necessary. While rotational grazing is somewhat different, when you have your pasture, you may break it up into what we call paddocks, smaller areas. And so at no given time, the animals are allowed to graze the entire area. So you break it up into sections, and the animals are brought to a paddock, and they're allowed to graze, and then you bring them to, when that area is basically exhaust, or you feel the need to move them to another area on the same pasture, we basically bring them to that area, and then you rotate the area. So at no point, and it's beneficial to soil erosion, because some animals such as sheep, they are considered to be low grazers, and low grazers, they eat right down to the ground, right? And so if they're eating down to the ground, that will allow the soil to be left bare. So under continuous grazing, and it may allow for overgrazing to occur, and that will lead for soil erosion because you don't have any cover being provided by the plant material. So rotational grazing will help in such a way that if you have at least 4 paddocks, by the time you move them to 2, while they were at 1, when they're at 2, 1 will get a chance to replenish itself. By the time you move them to 3, 1 may be fully replenished, and then 2 have an opportunity to do the same. So at no point the entire area is left bare. So that is what is the difference between continuous grazing and rotational grazing. Question 6 shows a figure. D shows a cross section through an egg, right? And we have A and B. And using your knowledge about egg formation in layers, and using your knowledge, you're going to name the parts labeled A and B. So A, if you notice, we have a small n, we have the large n, so A would have been the air sac, the air cell. Those are some terms that you can use. B would have been the albumen. And so those are the areas to be labeled. The air sac helps with the exchange of gases. The albumin, it provides nutrients to the developing embryo. Jerome, part B says, Jerome, a poultry farmer, supplies eggs to a nearby supermarket. Farmer Jerome just acquired some new workers who place the large end of the eggs down while placing them in the trays. Some workers were also seen washing the eggs. The supermarket manager complained that the eggs were becoming spoiled much sooner than normal. As a quality assurance officer outlined to Farmer Jerome two reasons why the eggs had a shorter shelf life than normal. Now, one thing about the eggs, as we mentioned earlier on, when we looked at the parts that were asked to be labeled, the air sac, which is the larger end. And so that should always be turned up. If you place that downward in the tray, in the flats, it creates a problem for gaseous exchange, and that will allow for his eggs to spoil much sooner. The next thing is the fact that some of these new workers, apparently they are not aware that they should not be washing the eggs. They should be wiping the eggs for the most part, if it is that it has debris or some form of foreign material on it, because presentation, we want them to be in the supermarket. Nobody wants to purchase eggs with some amount of litter, because they're coming from the poultry house. You might see litter on the egg. So wiping the egg would have been ideal, but once you wash the eggs, water can get inside because there are pores in the shell, and so water will seep in, and that would have been one of the contributing factors to the shelf life basically getting shorter for the eggs that he's supplying. So that is it. Question 7 says, marketing and rural infrastructure are two major constraints. And we know that CXC tends to interchange constraints with the word problems, with the word challenges to agriculture in the Caribbean region. So marketing, some of the time, your farmers, they produce their crops and you just don't have anybody to sell the crops to. So it's a problem in agriculture where the marketing of the produce, the market, the persons to purchase the crop at the end, even though it's good to do a market research before entering into any venture. Rural infrastructure, some simple things such as, and I shouldn't say simple things, they're important, roads, right? Light, water, basic necessities sometimes are lacking. And they're lacking majority of the times in the rural area. But it says, name two other constraints to agriculture in the Caribbean region. Definitely, predial larceny is one of those constraints, the problem where produce and animals are actually they're being stolen from farmers. So they're not able to capitalize on their income. They grow the crops from seedlings or seeds to maturity. When they produce the fruit, somebody else comes and reap it. That is it. They grow the animal from a young till it becomes mature, and by the time it's needed to be slaughtered, somebody else come and slaughter it. Topography is another challenge, another constraint we have in the Caribbean region. We have mountains, we have slopes, we have hills, and these make it difficult for farmers to utilize machines. It is also a challenge when it comes on to soil erosion, because you know, it's more likely for it to occur on a sloping land than one which is a flat or a plain. You have other things such as um, extension service. These are the persons who should be the link between the farmer and the researcher, and sometimes they're limited. You don't have enough extension officers, so you still have farmers not being able to get support and explanation, especially if you have a new product, a new item, a new form of technology that is now being exposed. They don't know how to do it because we have limited extension officers to service all the farmers in these areas. Climate. Climate condition is another constraint. You know, in the Caribbean, we're not affected by snow, but sometimes there are droughts, and with the droughts, we tend to, the farmers are experiencing additional expenses because now they have to think about how to get water to their property. And so the farmer has to truck or buy water, which is very expensive. When you look at the rainy season, they're experiencing flooding. And so this will affect sometimes their livestock and even their crops. And even the increase in soil erosion, even the increase in pests and diseases happen because this increased number of rainfall. So climate condition is a other constraint that seriously affects the Caribbean. We have capital. Now, capital deals with the money that the farmers need. Yes, sometimes loans are available, but if you're going to a commercial bank, persons doing agricultural enterprises or businesses are faced with high interest rates. And so it deters persons as farmers to maybe venture into another business when they have the land. Also, the availability of land itself, where the government, the farmers are not able to meet up to the persons who are in real estate in terms of purchasing power. So in Jamaica, the Matalan and the Issa and those persons who are building these housing schemes, if we're not careful, they are going to be taking over very arable land that is should be utilized for agricultural purposes. And so that in itself is another. Um, Land fragmentation, as the land is passed down from generation to generation, we have it being less utilized for agricultural purposes because different offspring may have different intentions. And so eventually, as it is passed down, we have a situation where it may not be utilized for agricultural purposes. Definitely attitude. Attitude, some farmers are finding it hard to acquire young persons to actually work on their farm because there's this stigma attached. Once you're doing agriculture, you know, it seems as if it is hard work. There's a slavery thing that is attached to agriculture, and so persons are not willing to basically carry out the agricultural task. So those are some of the constraints that we find in agriculture. Next, it says, name agriculture plays an important role in providing some level of food security. Now, food security is the availability of food to persons. Persons have access to food, right, in the Caribbean. Name two other contributions that agriculture makes to the region. Definitely, when you look at agriculture, you know that countries will export their crops. In Jamaica, we export banana, sugarcane, coffee. These are just to name a few of the crops that we export, and by doing so, we obtain foreign exchange. Mark you, right now, there is a talk about agritourism, where persons come to Jamaica just for the food, just for the plants. We have a lot of beneficial plants here in the Caribbean, not only Jamaica alone. And of course, we have these agricultural shows. In Jamaica, we have the Denby Agricultural Show, the Boston Jerk Festival. These are some of the things that persons from overseas come to Jamaica for. Agriculture provides clothing. When you look at agroforest, sorry, not agroforestry, that is shelter. But when you look at things where we can obtain clothing from our cotton, we can get it from our sheep in terms of wool, we can get it from silkworms. Those are, it provides clothing. Agriculture provides shelter. I was about to speak about the agroforestry. It deals with, you know, trees, permanent crops, where you have timber trees are a part of it. Your nice, your dresser. And in Jamaica, we talk about our dresser or nightstand, night table, our chest of drawers. Those things are created from board. And so we get that through agriculture. Drink stimulants and medicine. Majority of our plants, as we said, they have some form of medicinal value to them. Cannabis sativa, ganja, yes, commonly known, is very good in terms of for AIDS patients. Sometimes we give them in pill form, and what this does is to increase their appetite. It allows them to consume more food because sometimes it creates that loss of appetite, right? So those are beverages. When you think about sugarcane fermentation, getting the alcohol, Appleton rum, right? Ray and Nephew rum. We have Red Stripe here in Jamaica. We have sorrel beer. We have cassava beer. We have different types of beverages that we have, and these are coming from the fact that we are able to do agriculture. So entertainment, we've seen the hike in, things like a dog show. In Jamaica, we also have Caymanas Park, where we have the horse racing. So that is also another means of entertainment. In other countries, they may use animals for transportation. Speaking to a friend the other day, and one of the things that he does for his pastime is to go fishing. So leisure activities. An old lady, and not to just to highlight those persons, but persons after they reach retirement may come out and look at their plants and they water them, and it keeps them more active. So it provides a means of leisure activity, right? So those are some of the contributions that it has. We know about the GDP, gross domestic product, all of the things that are being sold or we getting money from by a country. Then agriculture is playing a vital role for that, even in Jamaica. We have some international and some local regional institution concerned with agriculture. We have some the aims or objectives of some of these institutions, but we want to run through the concept of the meaning of the institution. So we're looking at CDB, Caribbean Development Bank. And once we hear about bank, we think about capital, we think about loans. And so their objective is to provide loans to farmers so they can undertake projects. They know that farmers may not have the startup capital for a particular business venture, so they provide the loans for them. Case found in Jamaica, the College of Agriculture, Science and Education. It provides graduate training in agriculture. Located in Paisley Gardens, Portland. Portland is the parish of the breathtaking sights. Yes. Cardi, Caribbean Agricultural Research, and a lot of students leave out that and Development Institute. Some students may say institution, it's institute. And they deal with research. So when you want to find a new variety, when you have a new pesticide to control a particular insect, right? So these are the international, the local, and the regional institutions. The FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, they help to develop appropriate food technology. The CFNI, which is the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute, they help to promote agricultural development and improve nutrition. They want to eliminate poverty, right, in the rural areas. So those are the objectives, right? Question 8 speaks to global warming is a major issue affecting agriculture. Explain what is meant by the term global warming. So global warming is the increase in the temperature of the atmosphere due to the increase in greenhouse gases. Now remember, when the sun rays enter onto the earth, some of it is reflected back into space. Now the greenhouse gases, when we emit them, naturally it warms the earth, and that's how we're basically kept warm. The problem is we may now have too much. There's this unbalance in terms of the greenhouse gases. You know, carbon dioxide and methane are the two popular, the major greenhouse gases that help to trap the heat. So when we burn our fossil fuels from our cars, when we get electricity through to our electric light companies, they help by utilizing petroleum to get the energy that they need. And of course, you know, petroleum is a organic compound which has a constituent of carbon. And so when you burn that and you release the carbon in the atmosphere, it creates a problem in terms of too much carbon. It will prevent the heat that the rays of the sun that should reflect back into space to stay longer on the earth, causing the temperature to increase. Identify 2 ways persons can minimize the occurrence of global warming. Definitely, as an individual, sometimes when we're having our leisure activities, we tend to just, you know, brag and show off that we have vehicles. You are going to the party, you have a vehicle, somebody else going to the same party, your friend that you drive, one person in the vehicle, another one person in that vehicle, maybe 2 persons in another vehicle, and all of that burning of carbon is released. So instead of doing carpooling, right? So carpool, you just take one vehicle that could carry all 5 of you to the location and you still enjoy yourself. And you get back home, you want to have 3 vehicles for the 5 persons. We can limit or conserve in terms of turning off the lights. A lot of times, and I may be guilty of it too, we fall asleep with the television on. Next thing will ask you, are you still watching? Are you still there? And so things like that, we are burning. We have our chargers, we have our laptops, we have other devices plugged in that are not being used. And so that will increase the amount of electricity. And you might be wondering, what does that have to do with the occurrence of global warming? As I said before, what it does, it contributes to the amount of petroleum that the energy companies using. So switching to solar is also another good idea, where you basically utilize the sunlight, solar panels to obtain energy. We use other alternative energy, such as wind. We can use water, right? Those are, you have bio, where we can get energy from the sugarcane, ethanol. Those things can be utilized. It says, why might global warming contribute to the destruction of coral reefs? Now, the coral reefs, when you have global warming, one thing that will happen is the increase in the temperature of the sea. So the seawater will actually get hotter. And this is not the norm for the coral reefs. And so what it does is to cause them to have a more pale appearance, and this is known as coral bleaching. So it bleaches the coral, and that is not something good. Question 9 says, rations for livestock are manufactured to meet the animal's requirements. It says, state the enzyme responsible for the breakdown of protein in the proventriculus. Once you talk about the proventriculus, you are talking about a chicken. Remember, you have the proventriculus, which is somewhat similar to the stomach of a human being. It has the characteristics of the stomach. It has the HCl inside, and protein is broken down by pepsin. So the enzyme is pepsin in the proventriculus. Remember, the ventriculus, also called the gizzard, that is where you have muscular or mechanical digestion occurring. State one function of the rumen. Now, once you hear a rumen, you're talking about a ruminant. And the ruminants, a sheep, a goat. A popular mistake that students think is that pigs are ruminants. No, they're not. Pigs are monogastric, just like human beings. Rabbits, no, they're not. Rabbits are actually pseudo-ruminants. They're false ruminants. They're capable of digesting the grass because of another part of their digestive system that is actually developed, right? The cecum. And so it is not the fact that they have a 4-compartment stomach where they're able to eat and digest forage material. So the rumen is the largest part of the compartments that make up the digestive tract of the animal. And what you find in the rumen is it is responsible for fermentation. When you read certain literature, when you look in certain books, they refer to the rumen as being the fermentation vat. So that is where you have the microorganism, and they're fermenting the plant material that is taken in by the animal. Farmer uses grass silage supplemented with wheat middlings and molasses, urea blocks to feed his animals. Name one animal which best utilizes the feed types used by the farmer. One animal could be a goat. To talk about a ruminant, a sheep, cattle, those are some of the ruminants. Why is it that these feeds meet the requirements for the type of animal? Those type of animal require concentrate, they require herbage because they have a 4-compartment stomach. And if you talk about the mineral blocks that are located for additional minerals, supplement, just as how you may go to the doctor for additional iron tablets or vitamins tablets, because you need that additional minerals for your development. So they too have that. As the Minister of Agriculture, you were asked to give a speech on the role of the government and the private sector in agricultural development in your country. Identify 4 roles you should mention in your speech. And it says, yet well, 4 roles that are here. One role, they should be able to develop policies. And I spoke about the fact that farmers are not able to compete with these giants that are responsible for housing. So one responsibility of the government is to really set aside land for agriculture and say, hey, this land should not be utilized for any other purpose but agriculture, no matter how much money you want to have. So they are responsible to create policies, right? The government and the private sector is also, they have a duty to farmers or to the ministry to basically ensure that farmers get training. So training, sometimes through RADA in Jamaica, the Rural Agricultural Development Authority, persons are being trained overseas. If we have a new technology, we see now where drones are being utilized to spray crops. They're responsible for sending individuals to different countries that may be ahead of us or ahead of your country in the Caribbean to basically learn the techniques so that we can carry out and improve our agricultural sector. The government is responsible for providing capital. So they are responsible for providing loans. And sometimes they do this through subsidy. So if farmers are wanting to purchase some form of input such as fertilizer, seeds, they have a responsibility to give farmers. They can do it at a reduced cost. And as I said, a subsidy. So if the fertilizer, for example, $1,000 per pound, the government may say, okay, we will pay $300 out of that $1,000. So the farmer only experience or um, um, exposed to the cost of 700 to take out of his pocket. Much better than paying the 1,000 overall. You know, sometimes they can do much more. The farmers are responsible to providing the infrastructure, the proper roads. Farmer may be living in a rural area, but just to get to access to where his farm is, it's a problem because the roads are not there. No vehicle, no transportation, no public transportation will want to go that side. And speaking of infrastructure, as we said, this regard relates to the basic necessities. And so water, I mean, the farmer can only find water for his personal use. And so providing water is very critical, right? Ensuring a lot of talk should be focused on rainwater harvesting in the countries in the Caribbean to ensure, you know, we don't have a problem with water shortage. We just have an issue in how we can harvest the water when the time comes. When we have those heavy showers of rain or those periods where we have a lot of rainfall. So we can utilize and maximize. Now, this question may be linked back to the above list two issues affecting global agriculture. Global warming is one issue, but bioterrorism is a global issue where persons may use bio in terms of life, like anthrax or some form of microorganism to cause ill or harm to individuals. So we don't have to bomb down an area. We don't have to use a gun. Sometimes it's just through food. So we kill off our country's supply. We destroy their water supply. So things like that. So that's one global issue in terms of agriculture. We know we have the challenge of, again, global warming. That's a global issue. It creates a problem where temperatures may be too high for certain plants. Here in the Caribbean, because of that increased temperature, plants are not performing properly. We have longer droughts, so it's affecting the farmers in terms of crop production. We basically have stronger, more hurricanes, so the farm structures are being damaged. Crops such as planting or banana that may take 2 years to reach, or 1 year and a couple months to reach maturity, maybe become, short. And so these are some of the issues, the global issues that are affecting pollution, whether water, air, or land pollution is global issues affecting agriculture. You are working with the pest control authority, and the farmer asks you to briefly explain what are pesticides. Be sure to include 4 categories of pesticide and state what they are used for. Now, pesticides are chemicals. It's a broad heading for chemicals used to control pests and diseases. And so one of the pesticides that we're going to be looking at, you have several you can look at: herbicide or weedicide. Now, herbicide, sometimes interchanged with weedicide, are chemicals that are used to control weeds. We have pre-emergent or post-emergent. Pre meaning you apply this herbicide before the weeds emerge. Post-emergent, you apply it after the weeds emerge. And so we have systemic or contact herbicide. And on contact, when you spray this, it damages the structure, the chlorophyll of the plant. Sometimes when you spray these herbicide, you recognize that the plants, the leaves of the plant becomes brown. And we all know that chlorophyll is needed to trap the sunlight and help with photosynthesis. And so it disrupts the physical performance of the plant and causing them to die, right? We have insecticide. We have stomach poisoning. We have repellents. So sometimes when you look at the seeds, they have a coating of insecticide on it that will repel the ants and other birds from eating the seeds. So insecticides are used to control insects, right? We have also contact, systemic, and we say we have stomach poisoning. We have fungicide. Fungicides are used to control fungal infection, fungal diseases, right? We have nematicide. We have some nematodes, some small microscopic worms that live on the root of plants. And so the nematicide is used. We have rodenticide, your popular rats and rodents, and we know they are able to transmit or carry diseases, leptospirosis. And so rodenticides are used to, control those. Molluscide, that is used to control snails and slugs, right? They move slow, but they can create damage. They can wreak havoc on your crops, right? So these are some of the examples of the pesticide. Farmer Harry Paul, right, weeded his land before transplanting his pak choy seedlings. 4 weeks after transplanting the seedlings, he observed that the weeds on the beds were taller than the pak choy plants. As an extension officer, discussed with farmer Harry Paul, right, any 3 ways in which he can control the growth of weeds. 3 ways. So normally, when we are looking at weeds, 3 broad categories: chemical, mechanical, or even biological control. Chemical, as we mentioned earlier, just now, we spoke about the herbicides or the weedicides that you can use to basically get rid of the weeds. Contact, pre-emergent, post-emergent, all of those are means of chemical. So you spray it on the plant. Biological, and you have to be careful with this method. So sometimes in orchard crops, persons will release their animals to help to eat down the grass. So if it's a vegetable crop, you can't try this because the animals are going to probably feed on your vegetables. But because orchard crops, they're very large, right? So you can try the biological control. We also have mechanical, where you can use a machine, a weed cutter, to cut away the grass, right? Other implements can be used like a cutlass to cut away the grass or other, and I didn't think I said this, but weeds are unwanted plants. So plants that are growing in areas there where they're not needed. And so we can use the cutlass as a as a mechanical. Manual is just hand pulling. So I can basically go and pull the weeds with my hand and basically have them rid from the farm. So manual, chemical, biological, and also mechanical are ways that we can control the weed growth. So again, part 3, preparing you. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, share the video, comment. How was the video in terms of assisting you to get to the place that you want to be for your exam? Thanks again.